1 month passed. The other shelters in Forest Zone 7 were already beginning to fall apart. Rain and wind took their toll on hastily built structures. Animals chewed through cord bindings. Walls leaned and collapsed. Within a year, most of them would be nothing but rotting piles of wood. Danny's cabin stood unchanged. The dovetail joints held firm. The crystal windows sparkled in the sunlight. The water wheel turned endlessly in the stream, powering lights that could be seen glowing through the trees at night. Professor Kefsora declared the cabin a permanent teaching example. She brought new classes to study it, pointing out the techniques Danny had used, explaining the principles behind each system. Students from other departments came to examine the construction. Engineers studied the power system. Architects analyzed the structural design. Everyone wanted to understand how a human had built something so remarkable with only basic tools. The Academy administration asked Danny to give a lecture. He stood in front of a hall filled with students and faculty from dozens of species. His hands shook with nervousness, but his voice was steady. "Humans have a phrase," he said. "Measure twice, cut once." It means that you should plan carefully before you act. Rushing leads to mistakes. Patience leads to quality. He showed them images of human buildings. The great pyramids of Egypt, standing for thousands of years. The ancient temples of Greece and Rome. The bridges and towers and cathedrals that humans had raised over centuries. Each one built to last. Each one a monument to human craftsmanship. "We do not build for today," Danny explained. "We build for tomorrow. We build for our children and our grandchildren. We build for people we will never meet. That is what drives us. That is what makes us work harder than necessary, what makes us exceed requirements, what makes us create things of lasting value." The audience listened in silence. For most galactic species, efficiency was everything. Resources were calculated precisely. Effort was measured against return. The idea of building beyond what was needed, simply for the sake of quality and legacy, was strange and new. After the lecture, students approached Danny with questions. How did humans learn these techniques? Were all humans capable of such work? Could he teach them? Threx waited until the crowd had thinned. The Darvani walked up to Danny slowly, his scales muted and his tail still. "I want to apologize," Threx said. "I was wrong about humans. I was wrong about you." Danny nodded. "Thank you for saying that. Would you teach me?" Threx asked. "I want to learn your building methods. I want to understand how you think about construction." Danny could have refused. Threx had been cruel to him since the first day. He had mocked humans at every opportunity. But Danny thought about his grandfather, who had always said that teaching was the highest form of respect for any craft. Knowledge was meant to be shared, not hoarded. "Come to Forest Zone 7 tomorrow morning," Danny said. "Bring your tools. We will start with the basics." Threx's scales brightened with surprise and gratitude. "Thank you. I will be there." Over the following months, Danny became an unofficial teacher at the academy. Students came to him for advice on construction projects. Faculty consulted him on structural problems. His reputation spread beyond Varith 7 to other worlds in the system. The human who had been mocked as a primitive newcomer was now respected as an expert. The academy administration contacted Earth's educational board about expanding the exchange program. They wanted more humans with practical skills, carpenters, builders, engineers who work with their hands. The galaxy had advanced technology, but it had forgotten something important along the way. It had forgotten the value of craft, of quality, of building things meant to last. Years passed. Danny completed his studies and was offered a position on the academy faculty. He accepted, becoming the first human professor at the Galactic Academy of Practical Sciences. He taught courses on what he called human construction philosophy. His classes were always full. The cabin in Forest Zone 7 remained standing. New generations of students walked past it, hearing the story of the human who had been assigned to build a simple shelter and had built something extraordinary instead. The cabin became a symbol, a reminder that exceeding expectations was not wasteful but wonderful. On the first day of each new semester, Danny took his students to the Forest Zone. He stood before the cabin and told them about his grandfather, about measuring twice and cutting once, about building for the future. Then he gave them their assignment. Build a shelter, he said. 4 walls and a roof. Protection from rain. You have 3 days. The students nodded, preparing to rush off and construct the minimum required. But, Danny added, and they stopped. If any of you want to show me what you can really do, I will be watching. Some students still built simple boxes. But each year, a few tried for something more. A Korath student constructed a shelter with a water collection system. A young Dorvani, trained by Threx, built walls with interlocking joints. A human exchange student created a cabin that rivaled Danny's original work. The tradition spread. Other professors began encouraging their students to exceed requirements. The culture of the academy slowly shifted. Efficiency was still valued, but so was excellence. Quality began to matter as much as speed did. Danny never forgot where he came from. He kept a photograph of his grandfather on his desk. The old man standing in front of his cabin in Montana with sawdust on his clothes and a smile on his face. Sometimes, late at night, Danny would look at that photograph and wonder what his grandfather would think of everything that had happened. He liked to imagine that the old man would be proud. Not because Danny had become famous or respected, but because he had taken the lessons he learned in a small cabin in Montana and shared them with beings from across the galaxy. He had passed on the tradition of doing things right. That was the real legacy. Not the cabin in Forest Zone 7, though it still stood strong after all those years. The real legacy was in the students Danny taught, the skills he passed on, the philosophy of craftsmanship he spread to species that had never known it before. His grandfather had built a cabin that lasted 50 years. Danny had built something that would last forever, and somewhere in the universe, a new student was looking at an assignment for a simple shelter and thinking about what they could really do if they tried. The evaluation began at sunrise. Professor Kethsora moved from shelter to shelter with her tablet, accompanied by 2 other professors. She spent approximately 5 minutes at each structure, checking the walls, testing the roof, making notes. Most students received their grades quickly. Adequate, satisfactory, meets requirements. Danny watched from his porch as the professors worked their way through the Forest Zone. The other shelters looked small and fragile compared to his cabin. Many were already showing signs of wear after just one night. Walls leaned at odd angles. Roofs sagged in the middle. One shelter had lost its door, covering to nocturnal animals. Threx stood outside his rebuilt shelter, his scales shifting color nervously. When Professor Kethsora arrived, she examined his work for less than 3 minutes. The walls were uneven. The roof leaked. The entire structure creaked when the wind blew. Passing grade, the professor announced. Barely. Your construction quality needs significant improvement. Threx said nothing, but his tail lashed the ground in frustration. As the professors moved on, he glanced toward Danny's cabin with burning resentment in his eyes. The crowd reformed as Professor Kethsora approached Danny's plot. Word had spread through the academy overnight. Students who had not witnessed the construction came to see the human shelter. Even faculty members from other departments appeared at the edge of the gathering. Professor Kethsora stopped at the edge of the porch. She looked at the cabin for a long moment before speaking. Tell me about the walls, she said. Danny stood and walked to the nearest corner. Dovetail joints. Each log locks into the one below it and the one beside it. No cord needed. The weight of the structure actually makes the joints tighter over time. The professor ran one of her 4 hands along the joint. This technique is not in any of our engineering texts. It is old, Danny said. Humans have been using it for centuries. My grandfather taught me. Continue. Show me everything. Danny walked her through every system. He explained the piezoelectric crystals in the roof and how they converted pressure from wind and rain into electricity. He showed her the water wheel in the stream and the cables running to the cabin. He demonstrated the running water, the heating system, the resin windows. Professor Kethsora asked questions at every step. How did he calculate the roof angle for optimal energy collection? How did he seal the pipes to prevent leakage? How did he know the floor heating would distribute evenly? Danny answered each question, sometimes pointing to specific measurements he had made, sometimes explaining the principles his grandfather had passed down. The other professors took notes frantically. One of them, a small being covered in blue feathers, kept repeating the same phrase. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. When the tour was complete, Professor Kethsora stood in the center of the cabin's main room. Light from the crystal windows played across her compound eyes. The warmth from the floor was comfortable, even in the cool morning air. I have taught at this academy for 40 years, she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. In that time, I have assigned this project hundreds of times. The requirements are always the same. 4 walls. A roof. Protection from rain. Simple. Basic. Every student builds exactly what is asked for. No more, no less. She paused and looked around the room again. Never once has a student done what you have done. Never once has anyone exceeded the requirements in such a dramatic way. Most species in the galaxy optimize for efficiency. They calculate the minimum needed to achieve a goal, and they do exactly that. It is considered wasteful to do more than necessary. Danny nodded. He had noticed this about galactic culture. Everything was measured. Everything was calculated. There was no room for doing something just because you wanted to do it well. Why? Professor Kethsora asked. Why did you build so far beyond what was required? Danny thought about the question. He thought about his grandfather's cabin in Montana, still standing strong after 50 years. He thought about the houses he had built, the barns he had raised, the structures that would outlast him. Where I come from, he said, we believe that anything worth building is worth building right. My grandfather used to say that when you put your hands on a piece of wood, you are making a promise. You are promising that the thing you create will be worthy of the time and material that went into it. A promise to whom? To yourself. To the people who will use what you built. To the future. Danny gestured at the walls around them. This cabin will still be standing when everything else in this forest zone has rotted away. That matters to me. That is worth the extra work. Professor Kethsora was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to face the crowd gathered outside. This student, she announced, receives the highest grade I have ever given. His shelter is not merely adequate. It is exceptional. It demonstrates skills and understanding far beyond what this assignment was designed to test. The crowd murmured in surprise. Threx pushed forward, his scales darkening with anger. How is this fair? He demanded. The assignment was for a simple shelter. He built something completely different. He should be penalized for not following instructions. Professor Kethsora fixed him with a look from all her eyes. The assignment was to build a shelter with 4 walls and a roof that protects from rain. His shelter has 4 walls. It has a roof. It protects from rain. Tell me, Student Threx, which part of the requirements did he fail to meet? Threx opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His tail drooped. The human followed every instruction, the professor continued. He simply chose to exceed them. That is not a violation. That is excellence. She turned back to Danny and extended one of her hands. Danny took it and shook it, a gesture the Villani had clearly learned from studying human customs. Congratulations, she said. You have taught me something today. That is rare at my age. Danny smiled. Thank you, Professor. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with conversation. Yinny rushed forward and grabbed Danny in a tight hug, her fur soft against his face. You did it, she said. You really did it. Danny hugged her back, but his eyes were on the cabin. It stood solid and proud in the morning light, exactly as he had imagined it. Exactly as his grandfather would have wanted. He had done what he set out to do. He had shown them what a human could build. Danny woke before sunrise on the final day. His body hurt everywhere. His hands were raw and blistered from 2 days of constant work. Every muscle in his back and shoulders screamed for rest. But rest would have to wait. He had a cabin to finish. He started with the roof. The frame was already in place, and now he needed to cover it. He had prepared thin wooden slats the day before, and he began laying them in overlapping rows like shingles. Each piece was angled to let rain slide off while keeping the interior dry. Between the slats, he inserted more of the piezoelectric crystals, wiring them into his power system. By mid-morning, the roof was complete. Danny stood back and looked at what he had built. It was really starting to look like something now. Not just a shelter, but an actual cabin. A home. The windows came next. This was the part Danny had worried about most. He did not have glass, so he had to make something that would work in its place. He had experimented the previous day with tree resin and crushed crystals, mixing them together and letting them harden in flat molds. The result was not perfectly clear, but it let light through. It would work. He installed 4 windows, 2 on each side of the cabin. Sunlight poured through them, lighting up the interior. The crystal mixture and the resin caught the light and made it dance, creating patterns on the wooden floor. A crowd had gathered again. Word had spread through the forest zone about the human strange project, and students from other plots came to watch. Some brought food and sat on logs like they were watching a performance. Danny ignored them and kept working. Professor Kethsora arrived with a group of other professors. They stood at the edge of the crowd and observed in silence. Danny noticed them but did not slow down. He had too much left to do. The water system was next. He had laid pipes made from hollow reeds, running from the stream to a filtration system beside the cabin and then up to a small tank on the roof. Gravity would push the water down into the cabin when needed. He connected the pipes to a simple tap he had carved from wood. When he opened the tap for the first time, clean water flowed out. Several students gasped. Running water inside a shelter was not part of the assignment. It was not even something most of them had thought possible with basic tools. Danny moved on to heating. He had dug a shallow trench from a hot spring he had discovered during his first day of surveying. The spring was small, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. He ran insulated pipes from the spring under the floor of the cabin. The hot water would warm the floor, and the heat would rise to fill the room. It was a technique his grandfather had described, used in ancient earth buildings. Yinny pushed through the crowd and came to stand beside him. Danny, you found a hot spring? How did you even know to look for one? The steam, Danny said. I saw wisps of it rising on the first morning. Most people did not notice because they were too busy building. You are amazing, Yinny said. Danny shook his head. I am just paying attention. That is something my grandfather taught me. Before you build anything, understand the land. The land will tell you what it needs. The afternoon was fading when Danny began the final touches. He built a small porch at the front of the cabin, a place to sit and watch the forest. He added shelves inside for storage. He carved a simple chair and table from leftover wood. Every piece of scrap was used for something. By the time the sun touched the horizon, Danny stepped back and looked at his completed work. The cabin stood solid and proud against the purple trees. Light glowed from the windows, powered by the crystals and the water wheel. The sound of the stream mixed with the soft hum of electricity. Smoke rose from a small heating vent as the geothermal system warmed the interior. The crowd was silent. Nobody knew what to say. They had come to build simple shelters, boxes of wood to keep off the rain. The human had built something entirely different. Threx pushed to the front of the crowd. His scales had gone pale, a sign of strong emotion in Dorvani. His own shelter had collapsed again that afternoon, and he had barely managed to rebuild it before deadline. Now he stared at Danny's cabin with an expression that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. "This is not fair," Threx said. "You must have cheated. You must have brought tools from outside." Danny held up his hands. They were covered in cuts and blisters. "These are the only tools I used beyond what everyone received. Same as you. Same as everyone. Impossible. No one could build this in 3 days." Professor Kefsora stepped forward. Her compound eyes moved slowly over the cabin, taking in every detail. She walked around the entire structure, touching the walls, examining the joints, studying the power system. She went inside and stayed for several minutes. When she came out, her expression was unreadable. "The deadline is passed," she announced. "All shelters will be evaluated tomorrow morning. Students should return to their assigned quarters for rest." The crowd slowly dispersed. Yinny gave Danny a quick hug before leaving. Threx left without another word, his tail dragging in the dirt behind him. Danny sat on his new porch and watched the stars come out. The cabin behind him was warm and bright. The stream whispered its endless song. For the first time in 3 days, he allowed himself to feel proud of what he had accomplished. Tomorrow would bring the evaluation. But for tonight, Danny simply enjoyed the piece of a job well done. Danny Cole sat in the back row of the classroom and tried not to fall asleep. The seats were made for beings much larger than humans, and his feet dangled above the floor like a child sitting in an adult chair. Around him, students from a dozen different species listened to Professor Kefsora explain the midterm assignment. The professor was a Villani, standing 8 feet tall with 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to look everywhere at once. Her voice clicked and buzzed as she spoke through the translator device on her chest. "The assignment is simple," the professor said. "You will go to Forest Zone 7. You will build a shelter. The shelter must have 4 walls and a roof. It must protect you from rain. You have 3 standard days to complete this task." Danny looked around the room. Most of the students seemed bored. A shelter with 4 walls and a roof was nothing special. A Karath student named Yinny sat 2 seats away from Danny. She was small and covered in soft brown fur, with large eyes that reminded Danny of a raccoon back home. Yinny was his only real friend at the Galactic Academy of Practical Sciences. She caught his eye and shrugged, as if to say this would be easy. On the other side of the room sat Threx, a Darvani student who had made Danny's life difficult since the first day. Threx was reptilian, with green scales and a long tail that he liked to swing when he walked. His species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years, and Threx never missed a chance to remind everyone that humans had only joined galactic society recently. "This should take the human about a week," Threx said loudly. "His species was still living in caves when my ancestors built the first starships." Some students laughed. Danny felt his face grow warm, but he said nothing. He had learned that arguing with Threx only made things worse. The Dorvani enjoyed getting reactions from others. Professor Kefsora clicked her mandibles sharply. "Enough. You will all receive the same tools and the same amount of time. The Forest Zone has everything you need. I expect completed shelters by sunset on the 3rd day." The class ended and students began to leave. Danny stayed in his seat, thinking. He had come to the academy through the Galactic exchange program, leaving behind his job as a construction worker in rural Montana. His grandfather had taught him carpentry when he was young, and Danny had spent years building houses, barns, and sheds before the program chose him. The work here at the academy was usually theoretical, focused on equations and designs rather than actual building. This assignment was different. Yinny walked over and sat beside him. "What are you thinking about, Danny?" "It is just a shelter. 4 walls and a roof. Very simple." "I was looking at the data on Forest Zone 7, Danny said. "Did you notice the mineral deposits?" Yinny tilted her head. "There are many minerals in the soil. This is normal for forest areas. Some of those crystals have piezoelectric properties," Danny said. "They generate electricity when you put pressure on them." "Why does this matter?" "We are building shelters, not power stations." Danny smiled. "Where I come from, we have a saying. If you are going to do something, do it right." Yinny looked worried. "Danny, you should not make this complicated. Just build the 4 walls and the roof. Get a good grade. Do not give Threx more reasons to mock you." "My grandfather built a cabin when he was young," Danny said. "He lived in it for 50 years. When he died, the cabin was still standing, strong as the day he finished it. He always told me that a shelter should be a home, not just a box to keep the rain off." "But the assignment only asks for a basic shelter," Yinny said. "The assignment asks for the minimum," Danny replied. "That does not mean I have to give the minimum." He stood up and stretched. 3 days was not a lot of time, but it was enough. He had built things faster with less. The key was planning. Most of the other students would rush to the forest zone and start putting up walls immediately. Danny knew better. The first step was always to understand what you had to work with. That evening, Danny studied everything he could find about Forest Zone 7. The trees there had purple leaves and wood that was dense and strong. The stream running through the zone moved fast enough to turn a small wheel. The soil was rich with those crystals he had noticed before, and the position of the zone meant it received good sunlight for most of the day. An idea began to form in his mind. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious for 3 days. But Danny remembered watching his grandfather work, remembered the old man's hands moving with confidence and skill. His grandfather never rushed, but he never wasted time either. Every movement had purpose. Every cut was measured twice before the saw touched wood. Danny began to sketch. The other students would build lean-tos and simple huts, structures that would satisfy the requirements and nothing more. But Danny saw something bigger in his mind. A cabin with proper walls and joints, windows to let in light, a system to capture energy from the sun and the stream, heat for cold nights, running water from the stream. It was crazy. He knew it was crazy. 3 days to build what would normally take weeks. But he also knew his own skills, and he knew that the academy had never seen what a human with construction experience could really do. Yinny found him still awake late that night, surrounded by sketches and calculations. "You are not sleeping," she said. "The assignment begins in the morning." "I know," Danny said. "I am almost done with my plans." Yinny looked at the drawings, and her large eyes grew even larger. "Danny, this is not a shelter. This is a building. A real building with many systems. You cannot finish this in 3 days." "Maybe," Danny admitted. "But I want to try. Threx will laugh at you if you fail." Danny looked at his friend. "Threx laughs at me no matter what I do. He thinks humans are primitive because we came to space late. But the things we built on Earth, Yinny, you would not believe them. Bridges that span miles, buildings that touch the clouds, roads that cross entire continents. We know how to build." It is in our blood." Yini was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I hope you know what you are doing." "So do I," Danny said with a small laugh. "But one way or another, I am going to show this academy what humans can do when we really try." He looked at his final sketch. A cabin. A real cabin with everything a person would need to live comfortably. It would be hard. It might be impossible. But Danny Cole had never backed away from hard work in his life, and he was not about to start now. Tomorrow, the building would begin. The transport dropped the students at the edge of Forest Zone 7 just after sunrise. Danny stepped off and took a deep breath. The air smelled clean and green, like pine forests back on Earth, but with something sweeter underneath. The purple-leaf trees stretched high above, their trunks thick and straight. Good building material. Each student received a basic toolkit. There was a cutting tool that worked like a saw, a measuring device, some binding cord, and a few simple hand tools. Nothing powered. Nothing fancy. The point of the assignment was to test survival skills, not technology. Most students immediately rushed into the forest to claim the best spots. Danny heard the sounds of cutting begin within minutes. Everyone wanted to finish fast and get a good grade. Efficiency was valued above all else in galactic society. Danny walked slowly, studying the terrain. He found his assigned plot near the stream, which was perfect. The water moved quickly over smooth stones, and the ground was firm but not rocky. Sunlight came through a gap in the canopy above. It was exactly what he needed. For the first 3 hours, Danny did not build anything. He walked. He measured. He collected samples of wood and crystal. He tested the flow of the stream and checked the angle of the sun. Other students passed by his empty plot and gave him confused looks. Threx came by around midday, his tail swishing with amusement. "Having trouble, human? I can draw you a picture if you do not understand what a shelter looks like." "Thank you for the offer," Danny said calmly, "but I am doing fine." Threx laughed and walked away. His own shelter was already half finished, a simple box made of branches tied together with cord. It would keep rain off. It would satisfy the requirements. It was exactly what the professor asked for and nothing more. Danny returned to his work. He selected trees carefully, choosing ones that had the right thickness and grain. His grandfather had taught him to respect the materials he worked with. Every piece of wood had its own character, its own strengths and weaknesses. A good builder learned to see these things. By late afternoon, Danny had felled 6 trees and stripped them of branches. He began cutting notches into the logs, using a technique his grandfather called dovetail joining. It was slower than simply tying logs together, but the resulting joints would be incredibly strong. They would lock together like puzzle pieces, holding firm without any cord or nails. Professor Kethsora visited the plots that evening to check on progress. She walked from shelter to shelter, making notes on her tablet. When she reached Danny's plot, she stopped and stared. "You have only a foundation and some prepared logs," she said. "Other students have completed structures." "Yes, Professor," Danny said. "You understand the deadline?" 3 days. "We are already past day 1. I understand." The professor studied him with her many eyes. "What are you building, human?" "A shelter, Professor." "As assigned." Kethsora looked at his carefully notched logs and the precisely measured foundation stones. She said nothing more, but made a long note on her tablet before walking away. Danny could not tell if she was impressed or concerned. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain pounded the forest zone, and strong winds shook the trees. Danny had set up a simple tarp shelter for himself and covered his prepared materials with leaves. He slept dry and warm. In the morning, he discovered that several students had not been so lucky. The storm had damaged or destroyed 5 shelters that were built too quickly. Threx's box had lost its roof, and the Dervani was cursing as he tried to repair it. Danny walked to the stream and began constructing a water wheel. He had thought about this carefully the night before. The stream was fast enough to turn a small wheel, and that wheel could power a simple generator. He built the frame from wood and used flat stones for the paddles. It was basic, but it worked. Uni came to visit at midday. She stared at the water wheel turning slowly in the stream. "What is that?" she asked. "Hydroelectric power," Danny said. "The water turns the wheel, and the wheel generates electricity." "Electricity? For a shelter?" "For lights, and heat, and other things." Yinny shook her head. "Danny, nobody else is doing this. Everyone else just built 4 walls and a roof like the professor asked." "I know," Danny said, "but I am not everyone else." He returned to his main structure and began raising the walls. The dovetail joints fit together perfectly, just as his grandfather had taught him. Each log locked into place with satisfying precision. The walls rose faster now, and other students began to stop and watch. A crowd gathered as Danny worked through the afternoon. He had woven some of the piezoelectric crystals into a frame, positioning them where they would receive pressure from the roof structure. When weight pressed down on them, they would generate small amounts of electricity. Combined with the water wheel, he would have power day and night. "Why are you doing all this extra work?" a Karath student asked. "The assignment only requires basic shelter." Danny paused and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Where I come from, we have a tradition. When you build something, you build it to last. You build it right. My grandfather used to say that anything worth doing is worth doing well." "But it is inefficient," the student said. "You are using more time and energy than necessary." Danny smiled. "Maybe. But when this is finished, it will still be standing long after your shelter has fallen apart." He returned to his work. The walls were complete now, and he began on the roof. He had designed a specific angle to catch both sunlight and rain. The sunlight would hit the crystal panels he was building. The rain would flow into a collection system that would give clean water. By the end of day 2, Danny had walls, a partial roof, and a working power system. He was exhausted, his muscles aching from the constant labor. But he was on schedule. One more day to finish the roof, install the windows, and complete the interior systems. Threx walked by as the sun was setting. The Dorvani looked at Danny's cabin and said nothing. His tail had stopped swishing. For the first time, he did not have a mocking comment ready. Danny allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. Then he checked his plans for day 3. The hardest work was still ahead.